Hello, everybody. How are you all doing today? So, I am going to go over chapter 13, which is humanistic psychology, and we also touch on positive psychology a little bit, which I'm super excited about because I like a lot of the 7 key elements that we talk about when we talk about positive psychology. So, let's get started. When we're thinking about the humanistic approach to counseling, I want you to remember that Carl Rogers is kind of the one that was the big influence when we're talking about humanistic concepts um, in the clinical setting. So there are 2 main factors that we are talking about when we're talking about humanistic concepts and clinical implications. The first one is going to be self-actualization. This occurs when an inborn tendency develops if the environment fosters it. In other words, humanists assume that people, like plants, arrive with an inborn tendency to grow. Humanists call this tendency self-actualization and presume that if a person's environment fosters it, self-actualization proceeds without interference. So kind of just becoming the best person we can be, growing and fulfilling our highest potential, in other words. The other key concept that we look at when we're talking about humanistic psychology is positive regard. And oftentimes we talk about unconditional positive regard when we're using it in a clinical type setting. And what this is warmth, love, and acceptance of those around us. So unconditional means that people accept us and love us no matter what. Conditional positive regard means typically there's some types of strings attached in order to get that positive regard. Humanists also recognize that people need certain things to live, just as plants need sunlight. So people need positive regard like plants need sunlight. It's essential, and it is essentially the warmth, love, and acceptance of all of those around us. Under positive regard, we also talk about prizing, and Rogers frequently used the term prizing may best capture the experience of receiving positive regard from others. So when we receive that positive regard from our parents, our spouse, our girlfriend or boyfriend, that would be considered prizing. So what are the main goals of humanistic psychotherapy? Well, some of the goals are to foster self-actualization, so to help the client receive their, or to become their fullest potential, be the best person that they can be. Another goal is psychological problems are products of stifled growth and process, so helping them work through what that barrier might be that's preventing them from reaching that goal of self-actualization. Also going through and talking about conditions of worth that a parent may have placed on their child as they were growing up. So think about some examples might be, I'll love you if you do your chores, or I'll only give you appreciation and attention if you make the senior basketball team, for example. So having that condition, having strings tied to that condition of worth is something that some adults eventually need to work through in order to reach that level of self-actualization. Another example would be pointing out incongruencies. So a discrepancy between the person's real self and ideal self. So what is preventing you from becoming your ideal self? What inconsistencies are you doing in your everyday life that are preventing you from reaching that level of self-actualization? And then in contrast, congruence is that match between the real self and the ideal self. So what elements are you congruent on? Is there harmony between when you're looking at your real self versus your ideal self? So some of the elements of humanistic psychotherapy, which we've actually talked about many of these when we've talked about other different types of therapies and what makes a good clinician. But the first one is going to be that empathy, that element of empathy, which involves a deep, non-judgmental understanding of the client's experience. Like we said, we aren't always going to be able to completely put ourselves in their shoes, but to be able to just say, you know, I understand what you're saying, I see where you're coming from, is going to be very important when we're talking about that humanistic psychology experience. Having these elements of empathy greatly impact our clients' outcomes. And sometimes we use the term client-centered therapy synchronously when we're talking about humanistic therapy. So if you hear client-centered therapy or humanistic humanistic therapy, they are going to be very similar and sometimes are used interchangeably. Another element is, like I talked about, that unconditional positive regard. So full acceptance of your client for who they are, no matter what. So saying, I appreciate you as a human being, no matter what you tell me. No matter what you're going through, I will always accept you for who you are. This creates a higher level of congruence and will help to foster that experience of becoming self-actualized and reaching their highest human potential. And as a humanistic therapist, they accept clients entirely and unconditionally, regardless of what is going on. So that's something to remember if you plan on being a humanistic therapist. It's going to be accepting that client entirely, both for their good parts and for the faults they may have. When we're talking about elements of genuineness, it can also be considered the term congruence, called therapist congruence when we're talking about genuineness. So what this is helping establish a relationship that feels real. Sometimes the relationships we establish with clients can kind of feel surface level. And if we're going to be talking about a humanistic psychotherapy, you really need to focus on developing that genuine relationship with your client. It's going to make it easier for them to open up to you. It also helps to lead to that level of self-actualization in unconditional positive regard. If they feel that they can be comfortable with you, if they can open up and that you all accept them no matter what, it really helps build that level of genuineness and a real relationship. So just the three factors that we already talked about, empathy, unconditional positive regard, and genuineness are all very important when we're talking about the success of psychotherapy. And they're used in many different settings, not just humanistic psychotherapy. Next, we're going to move into a couple of other elements that need to be kept in mind when we're working as humanistic type therapists. One is going to be the reflection. And we've talked about reflection quite a bit when we've talked about how to interact with our clients and help build rapport with our clients. So as you already know, it contributes significantly to the success of psychotherapy. And it takes place when a therapist responds to a client by paraphrasing or rephrasing what the client has said, the statements that the client has made, and highlighting those emotions. And one thing to keep in mind is that reflection should be an attitude rather than a technical skill. According to Rogers, this attitude should include some humility, which can be lost when therapists reflect mechanically. So just repeating what they're saying and not taking their emotions into account. When they reflect, therapists should not be telling clients how they feel, but instead should be asking clients if the understanding of the client's feeling is correct. So instead of saying, you're mad, you should say, what I'm hearing you say is that you're upset. Would that be an accurate reflection of how you're feeling right now? In other words, therapists should not become overconfident in their ability to read clients' emotions and should always defer to the client's expertise on their own feelings. So making sure you ask the client how they're feeling instead of just assuming you know what they're feeling based on what they've told you. Some alternates that we have when we're talking about humanism, one of the main ones we're going to touch on is called existential psychotherapy. And this is each person is essentially alone and realization of the fact that can overwhelm us with anxiety. So when we talk about existential, we talk about what is that higher purpose outside of ourselves. So coming up with that we're not living a meaningless life, that we have some type of purpose. Some of the big existential therapists that if you're interested in this type of thing would be Rollo May, Viktor Frankl, and Irvin Yalom, Yalom, and that's in the notes too. They have a lot of really great research when they're talking about existential therapy and looking at the bigger picture, sometimes outside ourselves and what our purpose on this earth is. They have some really great readings and writings on that. And like everything, it works really well for some clients, especially those who are physically ill or concerned with the meaning of life, but it might not necessarily work with all clients depending on what their presenting problem is. Gestalt therapy is another one that we can look at when we're talking about historical alternatives. I'm going to flip right past though because that is not what I really focused on when we were talking about the test. A key element to humanistic psychology and counseling is the element of motivational interviewing. So what this is working with your client to see what motivates them. What are they trying to achieve in their life? How can we reach that level of self-actualization? And in this, we don't pressure clients to change, but rather we just might point out discrepancies that we're seeing in what they are doing to reach their goal and what their actual goal is. So pointing out those incongruents is important. So central principles of motivational interviewing are going to be expressing empathy, as we already talked about, taking that client's point of view and honoring their feelings about the experience are vital when we are talking about motivational interviewing. Next would be developing the discrepancy. Motivational interviewer therapists highlight how a client's behavior is inconsistent with his or her goals or values. So for example, let's say that the person comes in and says, I want to get healthy, I want to lose weight, and I want to start developing better eating and exercising habits. But when you ask the person what they're doing in their lives to achieve those goals, or ask them what their day looks like, they might say, I come home, I put my sweatpants on, I watch Netflix, and I eat chips. Well, those actions are not going to get them to that end goal, and pointing out the discrepancy and how that's not going to help them reach their goal is going to be very important. The last one is going to be avoiding argumentation. Therapists do not directly confront their clients, even if the clients are engaging in self-destructive behaviors. So we talked about confronting clients in some other settings, but when we are talking about humanism and motivational interviewing, we typically avoid confronting clients directly. Maybe in a roundabout way we can come around and kind of talk to our clients about discrepancies in their life, but we're not as direct about it as we might be in some other areas of clinical psychology. So I'll just let you look through those some more, just some more principles we're talking about when we're talking about motivational interviewing. Flip past this one. So we're finally on to positive psychology. Like I said, that's one of my favorite areas. And they have 7 different categories of positive psychology techniques. The first one is going to be called savoring, where clients intentionally focus on and extend without distraction moments of joy and happiness. So this almost might be like mindfulness, being present in the here and now, and just taking in and enjoying those moments of joy and happiness. And I've been so lucky this past week. My girls and I have been home together for 7 days. We might get to go see my parents when my husband comes home at night, but we've had a lot of really great moments of just having fun together and being happy and being joyful and intentionally, without being on my cell phone, without checking my emails, just taking in those moments and appreciating them for what they're worth would be an example of savoring. Gratitude is another element we're talking about when we talk about positive psychology techniques. This is when clients purposely focus on a reason to be thankful by writing letters, journaling, visiting important people in their lives, or simply thinking about things that make them feel appreciative. I am big on gratitude. I even have my daughter who is 6. Sometimes 6-year-olds are very self-involved, and she is a very spoiled 6-year-old. So one thing we've started doing in our family is that she needs to keep a gratitude journal. And every day she needs to sit down and write 3 things that she is grateful for, whether it be her friends, going to school, some of the toys she have. I just feel it's very important for her to realize everything that she does have, and that we shouldn't be taking that stuff for granted. There's also a really good channel on YouTube. It's called this, I believe it's called The Science of Happiness. I'll go look for you guys. And in that video, they had these students, or they had these people write a letter to somebody that played a very important part in their life for them. And it just talked about how much their happiness increased after they wrote the letter. And then they had to call that person and read that letter to them. And it's super inspiring. I know I've showed it in many of my classes, so I'm not going to show it here, but I will add the link on our module page if you want to go and watch that video. I just think it's fascinating and how impactful being thankful and how impactful gratitude is in terms of our psychological levels, especially when we're talking about happiness and reducing anxiety. So I will link that video because I think it's a really cool one, and I cry every time I watch it, so you should go check that one out. Next is kindness. So clients deliberately do nice things for others, including the donation of money or time for charity, volunteering, tutoring, or other similar activities. I love doing random acts of kindness. I do them all the time, but I think what's important when we're talking about kindness, when we're talking about humanism and positive psychology, is that you don't always need recognition or a reward for doing something kind. It should really just come from the goodness of your heart, and the goal is just to help other people, make other people happy. So savoring, taking in the good moments, giving gratitude for what we have, and then sharing that gratitude and the kindness to the people around us. Other key elements that we have are going to be empathy. So clients intentionally build a sense of understanding, forgiveness, and perspective taking with others in their lives. And I think it's important. In my sports and injury class, we talked about how do we reach out to those people that might not show that they're struggling. And I think one of the students said something really empowering. Always assuming that other people are trying their best is a great way to approach life. So in perspective taking, being empathetic, and just assume everybody's trying their best and doing the best they can in their lives. My daughter likes to say, I'm trying my kindergarten best. And it's just a way for her to know that she's doing her best. That doesn't mean she's doing it the same way a second or a third grader is doing it, but she's doing it as good as she can as a kindergartner. Next is optimism. Clearly and purposefully cultivating positive expectations about the future and anticipate good things that may happen in their lives. I am really big on being an optimist. I've shared before that some people in my family suffer with depression and might be more of a pessimist. So it's very important for me to keep an optimistic attitude, especially for my girls. I think it's important for them to see the good in life, even in situations like we're going through right now with social isolation, just pointing out all the positives we're having from these experiences, looking at how it's affecting Mother Earth, how it's starting to heal itself with not having so many carbon emissions in the environment, canals becoming clean again in Venice. Think about all the time you've been able to spend with your family members that you live with, because there's nowhere else to be. I know at our house, it's just been a very calming experience for us to be home together and not be in a rush to be any place. We don't feel attached to the computer. We don't feel attached to our cell phones. We aren't running off to the stores. We just get to sit at home and enjoy the positive experiences we're having with one another. And I think that's a very powerful thing to remember, especially in times of crisis and turmoil when we're not quite sure what's going to happen. Strength-based activities, and when clients deliberately use or write about their personal strengths in meaningful or novel ways. It's easy for us as human beings to get down about ourselves and point out all of our flaws. For strength-based activities, it's making a list of things that we're good at. We all have many different things and that we're good at and talents that we can share with other people, but oftentimes we overlook those when we're only thinking about the negative things that we have to offer. So sit down, write a list of things that you are good at. One of the things I found out I'm really good at is I really like planning out that 4-year plan for students. It's my first semester advising, and I love creating those 4-year plans and kind of helping students identify what classes they should be taking over the next 4 years. As a school counselor, I did that many times, and it's one thing that I really miss and I feel is a really strength area for me. So that's something I've realized lately. And last but not least is meaning. So clients intentionally remind themselves of their own value and set goals to live a life that falls in line with them. So what type of life do you want to live? Think about your values. Is the life you're living now meet the values that you have set for yourself? Or do you maybe need to alter some of the activities you're taking part in? One thing that I really value is health. I want to be around as long as possible for my children and for my husband. And therefore, since we have nothing better to do except stay home all the time, is I'm going to start working out again and watch what I'm eating. Eating junk food and never working out really doesn't align with my value of being healthy, and therefore I need to kind of change what I'm doing in order to become in line with my values again. So when we're talking about people that might practice positive psychology, it's just going to be helping people live their best lives. And instead of focusing on the negative and maybe this things they're struggling with, focusing on more of the positives and the strengths instead of that person's deficits. Just look through the last little ones here. I think that is all I'm going to really lecture on. Like I said, you are going to want to know that Carl Rogers is a pioneer when we're talking about humanistic psychology. He really was a big influence when we're talking about humanistic psychology. So that is probably something you are going to want to know for the test. If anybody has any questions, let me know. I know this was pretty quick and short and a brief rundown. So make sure you're looking through the PowerPoints, you're looking through my personal notes that are on the bottom of the PowerPoints, and check out this video. So if anyone has any questions, please let me know, and I would be happy to help you out with that. Hope everybody has a good day, and I'll create some new videos for next week. Thanks.